November 1943. The Solomon Islands. The ocean lies still beneath a starless sky, black water merging with black air. A Japanese cruiser column glides silently through the straits, their decks quiet, their engines muffled. Men lean against the railings, scanning the horizon for a hint of light, a flicker of movement. There is nothing, only the slow rhythm of the sea and the faith that their eyes will warn them first. But in the unseen distance, another fleet watches. In the darkened combat information centers of American ships, radar screens glow with pale light. Green traces sweep across circular grids, arcs of silence revealing what human vision cannot. Every pulse that leaves the antenna returns a whisper of location, distance, motion. On the displays, the Japanese column is not invisible. It is outlined perfectly in light. At 1:30 a.m., the American guns open fire. The night sea shatters. Shells whistle through the darkness, finding their marks with mathematical certainty. The Japanese cruiser Sendai is hit before she fires a single round. Flames rise from her decks, reflected in the black water like molten mirrors. The men aboard never saw their enemy, only the sudden transformation of night into fire. From the shattered bridge of another ship, a Japanese officer stares into the glare and whispers, "They are firing through the dark." It is not panic, but disbelief, a realization that something fundamental has changed. Warfare, once bound to the human eye, has crossed into another realm. For centuries, battle belonged to those who could see first. Tonight, that law collapses. Machines have learned to see where men cannot. As the last embers fade into the sea, silence returns. But it is no longer the same silence. In 1935, the world's great powers stood at the threshold of an invisible revolution. Across three nations, Britain, America, and Japan, engineers worked in secret laboratories, chasing the same idea, that radio waves could see what human eyes could not. The air itself could become an instrument of vision. In Tokyo, deep within the Naval Technical Research Institute, a small group of Japanese scientists experimented with this strange new technology. Their equipment was crude: coils of wire, glowing tubes, dials that twitched with faint signals. They had no name for what they were building, only a sense that it could measure the unseen. By late that year, they achieved what had seemed impossible. A beam of energy bounced off a ship several miles away and returned, a heartbeat of proof. But when they presented their results to the Admirals, the response was cold. Senior officers of the Imperial Navy, steeped in the traditions of seamanship and discipline, dismissed the device as a scientific toy. War, they insisted, would always belong to the eye, to men who could read the sea, sense the enemy, and act with intuition. Machines, they said, could never replace instinct. The scientists persisted quietly, refining their prototypes. Yet without doctrine, their invention had no home. The admirals spoke of courage. The engineers spoke of possibility. Between them stood a gulf as vast as the Pacific itself. Across that ocean, in Britain and America, the reaction was the opposite. There, radar was not dismissed as theory, but embraced as doctrine. Engineers were given budgets, soldiers were given training, and the technology was integrated into strategy. In 1939, British radar arrays lined the southern coast. In America, sets were being fitted aboard ships of the Pacific Fleet. Japan had the talent. It had the science. What it lacked was belief. The admirals could not see that their own traditions, the very virtues of observation and patience, had blinded them. For generations, the Imperial Japanese Navy had been ruled not only by ships and steel, but by sight. It was a force born from the age of the battleship. an era when victory depended on who could see first and strike farthest. The art of observation was not a skill, but a creed. Every officer was trained to read the horizon as a poet reads a line, searching for patterns in the distance, trusting the eye above all else. On deck, lookouts were legends. Men were trained from youth to spot the shape of a mast or the shimmer of exhaust 20 miles away. Exercises tested not their endurance, but their faith in the human eye, in the spirit of the warrior, in the belief that courage could outmatch technology. To these men, instruments were distractions and machines were suspect. A navy that prized discipline and instinct saw no need for invisible signals and glowing screens. This philosophy came from the top. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, scholar, gambler, and strategist, embodied the paradox of Japan's modern war. He admired Western innovation, yet trusted Japanese intuition. He believed that war would still be decided by will and boldness, not by machines that removed the human touch. His engineers, however, saw the tide turning. They warned him in reports that went unread. The enemy will fight at night with machines that can see. The warning was filed away, its authors quietly reassigned. The bureaucracy of tradition buried it under layers of hierarchy and pride. For the Japanese Navy, vision remained sacred, the direct link between man and battle, between courage and command. But beyond the horizon, across an ocean they could not yet imagine losing, another fleet was learning to see without eyes. Japan stands at the height of its power. From the shores of Yokosuka to the harbors of Truk, the Imperial Navy glimmers beneath the rising sun, a fleet of perfection built in steel and discipline. Every cruiser, every battleship, every aircraft carrier embodies decades of doctrine, and that doctrine rests upon a single belief. That vision decides victory. On the bridges of these ships, binoculars are sacred instruments. Telescopic rangefinders stretch like long metal spines across the decks, scanning the horizon for the first glimpse of the enemy. Officers move in silence, their words clipped, their confidence absolute. At sea, the eye is both compass and weapon. In the academies of Etajima, cadets are taught a single unshakable maxim: he who sees first wins first. Lookouts are treated as monks of a national faith. Their training is ritual, endless hours on the deck, scanning the waves until the eye learns to separate shadow from ship, reflection from threat. The best among them can spot a destroyer against the dawn at 15 miles, a periscope's ripple at 1. They are praised in newspapers, celebrated as symbols of Japan's vigilance. In their gaze, the admirals place their trust. Beneath this surface of mastery, a quiet rebellion stirs among the scientists. In small workshops, technicians and physicists experiment with new instruments, radar sets that send invisible signals through the air and read the world through echoes. They present their results with caution, hopeful but uncertain. Their reward is dismissal. "We already see everything," one admiral declares. "Why rely on machines when our men can see for themselves?" In the hierarchy of empire, science bends to pride. The admirals who command the fleet see not just with their eyes, but with tradition. To them, war is an art, not a calculation. Machines may assist, but they must never lead. Doctrine has become dogma, and dogma has become blindness. By the autumn of 1941, Japan's confidence is complete. The empire's expansion stretches across Asia, its fleet sails unhindered, and its enemies appear disorganized and slow. To the men who plan the coming war, technology is already conquered. Theirs is a world of optics and instinct, of range and resolve. Yet across the Pacific, in dimly lit control rooms, American and British officers watch green screens flicker to life. Machines are learning to see what no human eye can. On December 1941, Japan strikes first, with perfect visibility, flawless coordination, and absolute surprise. But as the bombs fall on Pearl Harbor, the future they cannot yet see has already begun to turn against them. December 7th, 1941. Dawn approaches the island of Oahu. The sky is calm, painted in soft layers of gold and blue. In a small, isolated radar station at Opana Point, two young American soldiers, Privates George Elliott and Joseph Lockhart, watch a faint blip appear on their screen. The signal is strong, steady, and moving fast. Dozens of aircraft, perhaps more. They report it immediately. The officer on duty listens, then dismisses it. "Probably American bombers," he says. Training flights from the mainland were expected that morning. The report is filed away as routine. The men at the radar station continue to watch the screen, uncertain, then stand down. The machine had seen the truth, but the human system built around it could not yet believe. Minutes later, the first wave arrives. Japanese aircraft emerge from the clouds over Pearl Harbor. Sunlight flashing on their wings. Torpedoes streak across the harbor. Bombs fall through the morning air. Battleships burn. Men scramble from their bunks into chaos. Within 2 hours, much of the U.S. Pacific Fleet lies in ruins. 2,403 Americans dead, 1,178 wounded, 6 battleships sunk or crippled. It was a perfect surprise, planned with precision and executed with faith in the old ways. The eye, the sky, the sword. But beneath the triumph, history was already whispering its irony. The very technology Japan had dismissed, the weapon of the invisible, had detected them before they struck. The Americans had seen them coming. They simply did not understand what they were seeing. For Japan, the victory was intoxicating. The empire had struck first, struck hard, and confirmed its own doctrine of human skill and daring. In Tokyo, the news was met with celebration. Yet no one asked the question that would decide the future. What had allowed them to be seen at all? Across the ocean, the United States would ask and answer that question. Radar, once an experiment, would now become a religion. Within months, radar stations would ring the Pacific. Airships, submarines, and aircraft carriers would bristle with antennas. The nation that had failed to trust its own machine on that morning would never again fight blind. But in Japan, pride remained policy. Their leaders saw Pearl Harbor not as warning, but validation. The doctrine of the eye had won. In that belief lay the seed of their undoing. For even as smoke still rose from the waters of Oahu, a quiet transformation had begun, one that would turn the weapon they mocked into the instrument of their defeat. By 1942, the sea had changed. The United States Navy, bloodied but unbroken, began to rebuild not only its ships, but its way of seeing. Radar, once a curiosity, was now doctrine. Crews trained by the thousands to read its screens, to translate invisible echoes into vision. Every destroyer, cruiser, and carrier received its own electronic eyes. Operators learned to fight not by moonlight or starlight, but by pulses of radio energy. The age of guessing was ending. Across the Pacific, Japan stood still. Its admirals, buoyed by the triumph of Pearl Harbor, saw no reason to alter what had worked so perfectly. The human eye, they believed, could never be replaced. Their radar development lagged behind, underfunded, understaffed, and buried beneath layers of hierarchy. The few sets that reached the fleet were crude, their range short, their interpretation uncertain. To most commanders, they were curiosities, not tools. "The eye remains the best sensor," Admiral Kondo wrote in his diary. It was a statement of faith and a declaration of blindness. That faith met its first trial in the Solomon Islands. Here, under the vast darkness of the South Pacific, the U.S. Navy's new machines went to work. Night battles had once been Japan's domain. Their sailors were trained for it, masters of stealth, optics, and instinct. But in 1942, something had changed. American ships entered the black, with radar guiding them like sighted hunters. Their gunners no longer fired at flashes or shadows. They fired at coordinates, targets calculated and confirmed before the enemy ever appeared. In the Battle of Cape Esperance, U.S. cruisers detected Japanese ships long before they were seen. Radar plots translated into firing solutions. Shells crossed the dark unseen. The Japanese responded in confusion, their lookouts staring into the night, searching for muzzle flashes that never came. For the first time, the masters of night fighting were fighting ghosts. Within months, the pattern repeated. At Guadalcanal, at Kula Gulf, at Colombangara, the outcome became less a matter of courage and more a measure of detection. Radar gave the Americans the one thing no navy had ever possessed before: foresight. Gunnery shifted from reaction to prediction. Victory began to depend not on who saw first, but who trusted their machines first. Japan's officers recorded the change with quiet alarm. Reports spoke of invisible engagements, of shells arriving without origin. The tactics that had once defined their dominance, speed, surprise, coordination, now betrayed them. They were still fighting by sight in a world that had moved beyond it. The balance of the Pacific was shifting, not through ships or numbers, but through faith. Faith in a new kind of vision, born from circuits and light. The Solomon Sea. The waters around Guadalcanal have become a graveyard for ships, for men, for doctrines. The Imperial Japanese Navy, once master of the Pacific night, sails again into darkness. But this time, something unseen waits for them. Their lookouts stand rigid on the decks, eyes straining across black waves. For generations, the night had been their ally, their tactics, their pride. They had learned to fight by instinct, by the shimmer of gunfire, by the faint phosphorescence of wakes. They believed no navy on earth could challenge them after sunset. But the ocean that once obeyed them has changed. Miles away, unseen and silent, American cruisers and destroyers glide through the same darkness. On their bridges, men sit not at telescopes, but at glowing screens. The radar's circular sweep paints the sea in lightless lines. Every movement, every bearing, every ship, revealed without moon or eye. At Cape Esperance, the Japanese formation moves with precision, unaware it has already been marked. The Americans watch the ghostly blips move closer on their displays, their positions plotted, their speed measured. Orders are whispered, bearings confirmed. No one shouts. There is no need. Fire control systems take aim long before the enemy is visible. At 11:46 p.m., the night explodes. Shells arc invisibly through the dark, finding targets with mechanical certainty. The first Japanese cruiser is struck before her lookouts can even raise alarm. The second bursts into flame moments later. Searchlights flicker on, too late, blinding their own men, illuminating the precision that is destroying them. On the shattered decks of the Furutaka, officers stare toward the black horizon, unable to comprehend what they are facing. Their shells arrived before we knew they were near. One survivor later wrote, "To the Japanese, it seemed as though the Americans had learned to see in the dark. They were right. By dawn, the waters off Cape Esperance are littered with debris. The once invincible night fighters of the Imperial Navy are forced to retreat, not defeated by numbers, but by an idea. Their doctrine, forged in the clarity of daylight, cannot survive the invisible mathematics of radar. The eye has lost its dominion. Still, the Japanese cling to their methods. Reports describe unusual engagements and enemy fire from unknown ranges. Admirals attribute the losses to luck, to coincidence, to the fog of war. Few dare to confront the truth. The enemy now fights with a new kind of sight, one that needs no light, no heroism, and no permission. As 1943 dawns, the balance of power in the Pacific begins to tilt. The Americans adapt with every battle, every transmission, every lesson. The Japanese, still bound by the doctrine of the eye, continue to fight the war they once dominated, and slowly lose the one they are in. In the logbooks of the U.S. Navy, the language changes. The word radar becomes common, routine. Detection replaces discovery. Fire replaces reaction. The sea itself becomes a calculated space, mapped, tracked, understood. For the men of the Imperial Navy, it becomes a mystery, a darkness that no longer hides them, but hunts them. By late 1942, Japan's naval engineers understood what their admirals refused to admit. They were fighting blind. Reports from Guadalcanal told of American ships that could see through fog and darkness, that fired before being seen, that struck from nowhere. The old confidence, the faith in the eye and the spirit, was beginning to fracture. In the laboratories of the Naval Technical Research Institute, humiliation became fuel. The scientists worked in silence, building what the fleet no longer believed it needed. Their creation was the Type 21 air and surface search radar. Crude, heavy, and fragile, it was an achievement born of desperation. Its range barely reached 20 miles, its signal easily scattered by rain or sea. It required constant tuning, constant repair, and the trust of men who had spent their lives trained to look outward, not inward. But when the first sets were tested on the battleship Hyuga, they worked. For the first time, Japanese radar spotted incoming aircraft before the naked eye. It was a quiet triumph, and an ignored one. At Navy headquarters, the response was muted. "The war," one admiral declared, "will be decided by courage, not electricity." Orders came slowly, reluctantly. The devices were expensive, and worse, unfamiliar. To many officers, they represented weakness, dependence on machines rather than instinct. Japan produced only a handful, enough for a few major vessels. The rest of the fleet continued to sail with nothing but rangefinders, binoculars, and pride. Across the Pacific, the United States moved in the opposite direction. Factories from Massachusetts to California poured out radar sets by the thousands, 20,000 by war's end. Each one smaller, sharper, more reliable than the last. The technology was no longer just an instrument, it was integrated into the bloodstream of command. Destroyers, carriers, and even submarines became moving eyes in the dark. On ships like the USS Fletcher, radar fused with tactics. The bridge hummed with synchronized data. Target bearings fed directly to gunnery systems. Plots updated every few seconds. Captains could see the shape of battles long before the first shot was fired. The night, once the Japanese Navy's greatest ally, now belonged to the Americans. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, the gap widened not just in machines, but in mentality. Japanese crews trained for precision and valor, not adaptation. To them, radar was not doctrine, it was distraction. They fought by instinct, trusting experience over electricity. But instinct has no range, no coordinates, no warning tone that whispers through static. Enemy bearing, closing fast. By 1943, the difference was measurable. In wrecks, in survivors, in outcomes. At battles like Kula Gulf and Empress Augusta Bay, U.S. destroyers used radar to form invisible ambushes. Japanese ships charged forward with skill and courage. only to find themselves under fire from an enemy they never saw. Their lookout still stared into black water long after the war had left such men behind. A captured officer, interviewed months later, admitted the truth with quiet reverence. "We believed men could outfight machines," he said, "but machines learned faster." His words echoed the shift of an era, one where intellect, not eyesight, defined power. Radar had evolved beyond equipment. It had become a doctrine of perception, of anticipating rather than reacting, of knowing rather than believing. The Americans had not just built better devices, they had built a philosophy of war that rewarded adaptability over tradition. Japan, bound by hierarchy and pride, clung to the visible world, until the visible world collapsed around them. US 1942. The skies above the Santa Cruz Islands burn with fire. The Imperial Japanese Navy launches wave after wave of aircraft, Zeros, Vals, and Kates, their shadows stretching across the Pacific. The Americans, battered from months of fighting, wait below with a new kind of weapon. Not a gun, not a ship, but an unseen presence pulsing in the air. Radar. Inside the carrier Enterprise, operators lean over glowing screens. Their hands trace faint arcs of light, echoes of something approaching beyond the clouds. Each blip is a warning, each signal a heartbeat of the enemy. Radios crackle. Coordinates are relayed to anti-aircraft batteries before a single plane is seen. The ships shift formation. Guns rise. Crews brace. The Japanese strike force is still 50 miles away. Then, the sky erupts. Radar-guided flak bursts in perfect rhythm, a wall of steel rising into the heavens. Pilots who once attacked unseen now find themselves ambushed by mathematics. Their formations scatter before reaching the fleet. Bombs fall wide. Machine guns fire at ghosts. The Americans, guided by invisible sight, fight as if the battle had already been written. Survivors return to their carriers shaken. "They fired before we were visible," one pilot reports. "They knew where we were, every time." For men raised to trust instinct and vision, it feels unnatural, almost supernatural. The sea, once their domain, has turned against them. In Tokyo, the reports arrive one after another. Admirals read them in silence. Some dismiss them as exaggeration. Others sense a deeper truth. They call it enemy fortune, or unusual coordination, unwilling to speak the word radar. To do so would mean admitting that Japan's mastery of the visible world has become irrelevant. Few who understood the technology writes privately, "We are losing to invisible machines." His words never leave his desk. Pride, the same pride that once built the world's finest navy, now blinds it. Tradition remains at the helm, steering toward inevitability. Meanwhile, in Pearl Harbor, American engineers refine the system even further. They integrate radar into fighter direction, plotting the movements of entire air battles on screens. What began as a defensive instrument becomes the mind of the fleet. From ship to ship, from sea to sky, radar threads an unseen network across the Pacific, coordination that no human eye could achieve. The Japanese response lags months behind. Their scientists work tirelessly, but their admirals still speak in the language of courage and intuition. To them, technology is not spirit. It is interference. The result is quiet but absolute. For every Japanese strike that arrives, the Americans are already waiting. The Battle of Santa Cruz ends not in a decisive victory, but in revelation. The Japanese still sink ships. The Hornet burns. The Enterprise limps home. But beneath the smoke, something irreversible has happened. The Imperial Navy has glimpsed its future, a war it cannot win through skill alone. For the first time, Japan's aviators fear not what they can see, but what they cannot. Their doctrine, their discipline, their faith in human perception, all are fading before the hum of unseen power. August 6, 1943. The waters of the Solomon Islands lie calm beneath a moonless sky. To the Japanese, it is the kind of night they once owned, a night for ambushes, for silence, for victory. But unseen beyond the horizon, 6 American destroyers glide through the dark like wolves. Their guns are cold, their engines low, their eyes not human. They see with radar. For years the Imperial Navy had ruled the night. Their lookouts, trained from childhood to read the horizon, could spot a mast at miles of distance. Their torpedoes, the Long Lance Type 93s, had struck unseen, devastating fleets that stumbled into their reach. But tonight, the darkness no longer hides them. It betrays them. On board the USS Dunlap, radar operators sit in a dimly lit room, faces pale against green screens. The air hums with electricity. A cluster of faint blips appears. Japanese destroyers escorting transports through Vela Gulf. Bearings are plotted, distances marked. Captain Frederick Moosebrugger gives the order. Hold fire. Hold position. The Americans wait, tracking every move. The Japanese advance, unaware. Their lookouts scan the horizon, eyes searching for silhouettes, glimmers, or wakes. They find nothing. The ocean seems empty. In their minds, the old confidence remains. We see first, we strike first. But this time, they are being watched by machines that do not blink. At 23:41 hours, Moosebrugger's destroyers turn as one. The order echoes across the fleet. Torpedoes, fire. From invisible tubes, 24 American torpedoes slice silently through the water. They cover the distance in minutes. There is no warning, no signal, no chance to react. The first explosion tears through the Kawakaze. Seconds later, the Hagikaze is hit amidships, then the Arashi. Fire blossoms where only shadows had been. In less than 10 minutes, 3 Japanese destroyers are broken and burning. A fourth, the Shigure, limps away, her captain stunned, unable to explain what has happened. From his damaged bridge, a Japanese officer watches burning oil spread across the sea. He cannot see the enemy, only the glowing wake of destruction. Later, survivors will describe it as a battle fought by ghosts. To them, it feels less like combat and more like execution. Precision beyond human capacity. When dawn comes, the Imperial Navy faces an unthinkable truth. For the first time in the Pacific War, Japan has lost a night battle completely. No American ship is even scratched. The tactical perfection of decades, the drills, the optics, the discipline, has been erased in one silent hour. At fleet headquarters, reports arrive in disbelief. The numbers make no sense. How could 6 destroyers annihilate a larger force without being seen? The phrase, enemy radar, appears in margins, cautiously, almost as a rumor. Admirals review after-action summaries and dismiss the idea. Some insist it was luck. Others blame torpedo failure or poor lookout discipline. Few grasp that this was not luck, it was evolution. For the U.S. Navy, the battle becomes a revelation. Radar, once an experiment, is now a weapon of strategy, not merely to detect, but to decide. Every subsequent engagement will be fought with that same invisible advantage. Every battle will begin before the enemy even knows it has started. Vela Gulf marks more than a victory. It marks the end of Japan's tactical supremacy. The age of instinct, of courage in darkness, gives way to a new kind of warfare, one where the winner is not the one who dares the most, but the one who sees the earliest. In Tokyo, an unnamed staff officer writes in his diary, "Our eyes are open, but the horizon is gone." He does not yet know how prophetic that will be. June 19, 1944, the Philippine Sea. The morning begins with stillness, a calm ocean beneath rising heat. On the horizon, two empires prepare to decide the future of the Pacific. Above them, the last great carrier battle in history is about to begin. For Japan, it is a matter of honor. For America, it is a matter of mathematics. The Imperial Navy launches its first strike wave at dawn, 373 aircraft, the largest single air armada Japan has ever sent into combat. Pilots lift from decks with discipline and precision, the product of years of training. They carry the spirit of Midway, the pride of Pearl Harbor, and the faith that courage can still overcome machines. But across the sea, the U.S. Fifth Fleet watches without eyes. They listen through the ether. On the carriers, Lexington, Yorktown, and Enterprise, radar antennas spin in endless rhythm, scanning the empty sky. Operators sit hunched in dark rooms, tracing faint arcs of light on phosphorescent screens. Each sweep reveals movement far beyond the horizon, aircraft still invisible to the naked eye. In the combat information centers, calm voices issue coordinates. Bandits, bearing 320, distance 150 miles. Orders ripple upward. Fighter directors compute vectors, adjust altitude, and radio commands to squadrons still circling the fleet. Angels 20, turn right heading 180. The American pilots never see the enemy until they are already positioned above them. By mid-morning, the first Japanese formations cross into radar range. They expect surprise. Instead, they find ambush. Hellcats dive out of the sun, guided not by eyesight but by instruction. The air battle that follows is one-sided and merciless. American radar has turned distance into advantage. For every Japanese pilot who finds a target, 10 are already falling from the sky. From the decks below, sailors watch the spectacle unfold. Tiny dots twisting, burning, vanishing into smoke. They call it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The phrase captures the scale, not the sorrow. In a single day, more than 300 Japanese aircraft are lost. Many never even reach the fleet. Radar-directed gunnery finishes what the fighters begin. Anti-aircraft fire, timed by electronics rather than human reflex, fills the air with invisible geometry. For the Japanese, the sky itself has become hostile. Pilots who once ruled the Pacific return silent, shaken. One later recalls, "We never saw them until they fired." The difference is not bravery, it is evolution. Radar now extends beyond ships. It rules the heavens. The Americans no longer fight where the enemy is, but where they will be. It is prediction turned into doctrine. On Japanese carriers, the aftermath is grim. Decks are scarred, hangars empty. Of the few pilots who return, many have no formation left to rejoin. Admiral Ozawa receives fragmented reports, lost squadrons, vanished signals, aircraft that simply never returned. He stares across the darkening sea, unable to understand how a fleet could be defeated by something unseen. Behind him, Japan's industrial base is collapsing. Their scientists, brilliant but starved of resources, had built radar sets of their own. Too few, too late, too fragile for combat. Their admirals had once called the eye the supreme weapon. Now that creed lies burning across the Pacific. For the Americans, victory is almost abstract. The Fifth Fleet hardly bleeds. Their pilots speak not of glory, but of efficiency. One naval officer writes afterward, "It was not a battle, it was the end of an idea." In a single day, Japan's air power, once the sharp edge of empire, is erased. No amount of skill, training, or courage can compete with the calm precision of circuits and signals. The Battle of the Philippine Sea marks more than the defeat of a fleet. It marks the moment when war itself becomes governed by data. Human senses have reached their limit. Beyond that threshold, the machine has taken command. October 1944, the Philippines. The war's final storm gathers across the islands of Leyte. It will become the largest naval battle in history. 4 seas, 4 separate clashes, one empire at its end. At the heart of it all, steaming through the narrow waters of the Sibuyan Sea, is the center force of Admiral Takeo Kurita. 23 ships, including the giants Yamato and Musashi. They are the last expression of Japan's naval faith: strength in armor, courage in command, precision through the eye. Kurita believes that spirit and steel can still turn the tide. But above and beneath him, the ocean hums with electricity. American submarines prowl unseen, their periscopes lowered, their antennas whispering signals through the void. Far away, in air-conditioned rooms aboard carriers, men watch screens glowing in the dark, faint blips marking the progress of Kurita's fleet. The Americans no longer wait for sunrise to find their prey. They already see it. At 0830, radar-equipped planes from USS Intrepid and USS Cabot rise into the morning haze. They fly guided not by compass, but by coordinates, invisible instructions drawn from the sky itself. The Japanese lookouts, trained for decades to read the horizon, spot the first aircraft too late. Bombs fall through cloud, and flame consumes steel. The Musashi, one of the largest battleships ever built, begins her slow, impossible death. Kurita presses on. For him, retreat is dishonor, and the enemy is still far ahead. But every mile brings another attack, submarines launching from positions plotted by radar triangulation, bombers diving with machine precision. He cannot see the hands that strike him. His fleet moves through a storm of signals, tracked from every angle, recorded in real time. By dusk, Yamato, the pride of the Imperial Navy, is nearly alone. Her guns thunder into the horizon, firing blind into smoke and mist. Shells roar across the sea, landing where no enemy exists. On the bridge, Kurita watches the tracers vanish into the dark, the light of each salvo fading like memory. He has spent a lifetime mastering visibility, range-finding, optics, geometry, but now the world has no shape. When radar reports reach the American command, the tone is clinical. Enemy formation scattered, course uncertain. Machines record what eyes cannot comprehend. It is not chaos, it is calculation. The sea, once ruled by intuition, now belongs to information. Kurita finally gives the order to withdraw. Around him, the remains of the center force limp toward the open ocean. They are pursued not by sight, but by knowledge. Aircraft guided through cloud by radio vectors, destroyers navigating by electronic maps. For the Japanese sailors who survive, the humiliation is complete. They fought with valor, but valor could not see the enemy. On the shattered deck of Yamato, an officer stares into the night and whispers a line from an old poem. The sea is endless, but our eyes are small. He does not know that these will be the last major guns Japan ever fires in open battle. By dawn, Leyte Gulf is over. The Imperial Navy, once the most disciplined and daring fleet on Earth, ceases to exist as a fighting force. Out of 400 ships, more than half lie broken on the seafloor. The survivors drift home through silence, across an ocean that no longer hides them and no longer belongs to them. For Japan, it is not merely a military defeat. It is the death of a worldview, the collapse of an empire built on vision. The age of the eye ends where the age of the signal begins. Japan stands on the edge of silence. The empire that once claimed dominion over the Pacific now watches its cities burn. Its navy lies beneath the waves, its airfields are empty, and its people, once promised victory through spirit, look upward into a sky they can no longer command. In the final months of the war, something remarkable happens. The very scientists who were once dismissed as dreamers are suddenly summoned. Factories that once forged torpedoes and rangefinders now turn to radar. Antennas rise along the coasts of Kyushu and Honshu, crude but functional, capable of detecting incoming bombers at 100 miles. Japan has finally embraced the invisible weapon, but it is too late. There are no fleets left to protect, no carriers to coordinate, no fuel to power what remains. The technology that once could have reshaped their doctrine now hovers above the ruins, a ghost of potential. In the Pacific, the Americans move with mechanical precision. B-29 superfortresses sweep over Japan, guided not by stars or sunlight, but by radar reflections bouncing off terrain below. Even through clouds and darkness, they find their targets. The bombers do not need eyes. The machines do the seeing for them. Tokyo burns beneath the hum of frequencies that Japan itself once invented, but never trusted. Each night, the air raid sirens wail too late. Japan's newly built radar stations detect incoming bombers, but they cannot act on what they see. Fighters have no fuel. Anti-aircraft batteries are empty. The data becomes prophecy, accurate, undeniable, and useless. Operators watch screens filled with blips they cannot stop. For the first time, the Empire's defenders witness the full power of the world they refused to enter. American reports call it blind bombing, but in truth, it is the opposite. It is vision without light, precision through absence. Cities vanish beneath blankets of cloud, erased not by human aim, but by calculation. To those below, it seems that the heavens themselves have turned against them. In the research labs of the Naval Technical Institute, the same engineers who once pleaded for progress now listen to the distant rumble of destruction. Their instruments, once curiosities, now measure the defeat of their own nation. One scientist writes in his journal, "We built it too late. This is the collapse of doctrine, not the fall of ships or cities, but the death of an idea." For decades, Japan's military believed that valor was measurable, that precision came from discipline, and that machines could only weaken the human will. They built their empire on faith in the visible world, but the war ended in frequencies and equations, fought by nations that understood what could not be seen. The irony is complete. The empire that began the war with eyes wide open ends it blind. The Americans, who once stumbled into ambushes at night, now navigate by invisible maps. The Japanese, who once saw first and struck first, are left staring into darkness, waiting for a storm that no longer needs to be seen to destroy. By August, the final act arrives. The atomic bomb, itself guided by radar altimeters, falls through clouds above Hiroshima. The flash that follows is not light, but revelation. The war that began in faith ends in physics. In the weeks that follow, Japan's scientists weep quietly in their laboratories. They are not defeated by the Americans. They are defeated by time, by their own refusal to believe that knowledge is as powerful as courage. When the surrender comes, the radar stations still hum. Their screens still sweep in circles, tracing an empty sky. The last signals fade as power fails. In that silence, an empire built on sight finally disappears into the very darkness it once mastered. September 1945. Japan lies in ruins, its cities leveled, its harbors silent, its empire dissolved. Yet amid the ashes, a new kind of visitor arrives. American officers and engineers, sent by the Joint Technical Mission, step carefully through the wreckage of the Imperial Navy's laboratories. They are not looking for weapons. They are looking for minds. What they find surprises them. In the basements of the Naval Technical Research Institute, they uncover neatly organized rooms filled with unfinished machines, radar consoles, oscilloscopes, magnetrons and vacuum tubes, all coated in dust. Charts still hang on the walls, covered in equations describing radio reflection and Doppler effect. The scientists, thin from rationing but polite and precise, bow deeply and begin to explain. The Americans listen in silence. The devices are crude by Allied standards, but the thinking is clear. Japan had the intellect, the engineering, but not the will to believe. The laboratories had built prototypes years before, only to see them shelved, starved of funding, and forgotten in favor of battleships and bravery. When the officers ask why, one elderly researcher answers quietly, "Because the admirals did not trust what they could not see." It is a sentence that explains not only the war, but its outcome. In the months that follow, Allied investigators record interviews with Japan's surviving naval leaders. The transcripts are clinical, yet haunted. One admiral admits, "We trusted courage more than instruments." Another concedes, "We believed man was the perfect machine." Their tone is neither bitter nor defensive, only reflective, as though they are speaking not to their conquerors, but to history itself. The Americans are careful not to gloat. They recognize in Japan's failure a universal truth, that every empire, at some moment, clings to the familiar even as the world moves beyond it. The war had not only destroyed ships and cities, it had destroyed the illusion that valor could outlast innovation. In time, Japan begins to rebuild. The same engineers who once built rangefinders for battleships and radar sets for carriers now turn to civilian work, radios, televisions, and transistors. Factories that once supplied the Imperial Navy's electronics divisions become the birthplace of Sony, Toshiba, and Panasonic. The discipline that once served war now serves invention. By the early 1950s, Japan becomes synonymous with precision, the very qualities that once doomed it. Hierarchy, perfectionism, obsession with detail now become the foundation of recovery. The nation that had dismissed radar as a foreign curiosity becomes a leader in electronics, mastering the unseen world of signals and circuits. For the scientists who lived through the war, there is both pride and sorrow. They understand the irony too well. The machines they had once been forbidden to build now define Japan's rebirth. A generation earlier, their warnings were silenced by tradition. Now, the entire nation listens to their successors. In the words of one engineer, written in 1951, "We lost the war to technology, so we chose to rebuild with it." Radar, the weapon that once symbolized defeat, becomes a metaphor for vision itself. From weather forecasting to air traffic control, from navigation to early computing, Japan embraces the very science it once feared. What began as a neglected invention ends as the cornerstone of modern life. The lesson endures far beyond Japan. Every nation that studies the Second World War finds in this story a quiet warning that pride blinds as effectively as darkness, and that every age of innovation begins with those willing to see what others refuse. In the quiet after surrender, as American officers depart and Japanese engineers return to their benches, a new doctrine takes shape, not of warfare, but of understanding. Never again will they dismiss what cannot be seen. A gray sea stretches to the horizon. Above it, a radar dish turns slowly, a perfect circle moving against the wind. Its motion is calm, mechanical, eternal. Each rotation sends out a pulse, a ripple of energy across invisible air. No human eye can see it, yet it touches everything. That single sweep travels farther than any lookout's gaze, farther than any telescope or rangefinder of the old world could have dreamed. It glides over waves, over storms, through cloud and night, searching not for what can be seen, but for what cannot hide. In that rhythm, there is memory. The hum of circuits carries the echo of 1943, of black seas where fleets once fought blind. It remembers the night over Iron Bottom Sound, the burning hulls at Vela Gulf, the chaos of Leyte. It remembers the voices of men who thought sight was supremacy. Today's destroyers glide through the same Pacific that once belonged to those men. But now, the ocean speaks in frequencies and reflections. The same silence that once concealed them now reveals all. What was once the empire of the visible has become the domain of the invisible. Every rotation of the dish is a story retold, of warnings unheeded, of science dismissed, of arrogance mistaken for strength. The lesson hums in the air like static. Vision is not sight. In the Second World War, the eye met its limit, and the machine surpassed it. Across the decades, the signal has evolved. The pulse that once spotted ships at 20 miles now maps entire continents, guides aircraft through cloud, and measures storms before they form. Radar became the foundation of a world built not on instinct, but on information. In Tokyo, a monument stands near the old naval laboratories. It honors not admirals or soldiers, but engineers, the quiet minds who once tried to warn an empire against its own reflection. The inscription reads simply, "To those who saw beyond sight, their work lives on in every ship that sails, every airport tower, every satellite orbiting the Earth." What began as an invention no one trusted became the heartbeat of civilization, the sound of the modern age. Beneath the waves, the admirals who ignored it rest among their fleets. They believed in the courage of the eye, in the purity of the human will. But the world they knew ended not with gunfire or storm. It ended in wavelength, in silence, in the invisible truth they refused to see. Above them, the radar turns once more, slow, patient, unending. It sweeps across the Pacific, across time itself, across the ghosts of the past,